Hello and welcome. Here at Nutrition Network, we are really, really excited to be hosting two beautiful ladies, and hopefully we will be joined by a third shortly. But currently on the screen, you see Kelsey, who is a Nutrition Network practitioner and coach, but importantly, she is not here for that today. She is here today to speak about her story with an eating disorder, as is Crystal, because this is what we're here for today. Welcome, Crystal. Welcome, Kelsey. As you can see, two beautiful women on the outside, but more importantly on the inside too. And they are very, very, very brave because they are here today to speak about their experiences with their respective eating disorders, how that felt to them, and their unfortunately long trials and tribulations trying to get treated, trying to get better, and finally finding something that worked for them. A very unlikely thing. And in fact, a strategy that is in the traditional sphere thought to be contraindicated even due to its restrictive nature. And that is a carnivore or animal-based diet. So many of you may know that eating disorders are restrictive by nature. And as such, you might not be surprised to find out that the standard of care when it comes to nutritional management of eating disorders says restrictiveness is out. You may not restrict the diet of someone with an eating disorder when you are treating them because it will just make them worse, because that's what they're suffering with, a restrictive eating behavior or disorder, right? But, and that's why I'm also looking forward to talking to Amanda, another registered dietitian who treats eating disorders, who can explain to us why a carnivore or animal-based diet is, yes, restrictive, but in a very importantly different way to what we think of as restrictive eating. And so we will be exploring all of that today. We will ask these ladies all about their experiences, their life, their eating disorder, and how they are today and why. And what have they done? Why are they feeling so much better? Because I think we'll find out that they are feeling so much better. Why? What did they do? And as clinicians or as practitioners, what we can offer, what hope of resolution we can offer to our patients. And for those people out there who are suffering with eating disorders, who are in the position that Kelsey and Crystal were in at their worst, that you can feel better, that there is hope, and that even if the traditional management strategies have been failing you thus far, that is not the end of the road, and you are not broken. And that's what we're going to be talking about today. So without further ado, I would like each of you to, let's start. Shall we start with Kelsey, perhaps? And then Crystal, you'll go next. Tell us a little bit about your story. Tell us, what is your eating disorder? What was your eating disorder? Do you feel that way about it? What were you, what did you go through? And then, how did you get to where you are today? And just keep it a little bit short because we have so much to get through. So give us an overview of you and your story, and then we'll dive into each aspect in a little bit more depth. Kelsey, you get us started.
Thank you, and hello, everyone. Brief overview, I come from a background of severe anorexia, bulimia, and anxiety. And I somehow I found the carnivore diet in 2018 after I had been in and out of so many treatments and hospitals. And I just found a coach who knew about carnivore, and she turned me on to that, and I've never looked back ever since. But I would just say something that is very strong in my message is that I was in the standard of care for 20 plus years. I bless my parents. They just tried absolutely anything and everything. And of course, especially with eating disorders, I mean, there's not much you can turn to except the standard of care, especially, you need someone to start eating again. It failed me, unfortunately. We do know that anorexia nervosa does have the highest mortality rate of any psychiatric illness. And I don't refute that, and I can understand why. So unfortunately, although seemingly efficacious for some, the standard of care is failing most people. And my ultimate message is that I kind of reversed engineered my mental health, and that everyone was so focused on the psychology, but no one ever really, turned an eye or thought of considering my biology and my hardware. And just with the diet alone, I clearly got all the mitochondrial energy, all the cellular health that I needed to then work on the psychology. So I do kind of say that I reverse engineered my mental health, and that's kind of my biggest takeaway.
Thank you, Kelsey. That was a beautiful summary. Crystal, can you tell us your story?
Yeah, so I had a background of binge eating, severe anxiety, depression, a lot of issues with that. And basically, I can remember my first memory of binge eating. I was 8 years old. So I pretty much had it my whole life. I don't really remember a time where I wasn't dieting. So it's been pretty severe. And then obviously when I went into my late teens and early 20s, that's when my mental health got worse. And I had severe anxiety where I would have like panic attacks pretty much daily. I couldn't work. I literally would work for maybe 3-4 months and I'd either get fired or I would just quit because I'd be so exhausted. I wasn't fueling my body correctly. So basically, I can remember, it would get to 3 p.m. and I would be fighting for my life, trying to keep my eyes open. And then when I would come home, I would just be so exhausted and I would use any form of escapism because I was just so unhappy. And it wasn't until I found carnivore that really took a turn. So I had like a lot of physical symptoms. So I had severe like TMJ, and I actually got told that I needed surgery because my jaw kind of locked. And then within like 1 month of doing carnivore, it completely cleared up. And that was something that I had my whole life, like since I can remember. I had a severe hand tremor. I suffered from like insomnia, and everything just sort of cleared up. My skin, that cleared up as well. And I think just the mental health, because it was so severe to the point where I couldn't work. I just felt completely hopeless and powerless. And I feel like I finally have my life back and I'm just starting to rebuild. And it's been such a great journey to have that power. So, yeah.
Wow. Thank you, Crystal. I think, I hear so much in your story that I know I've heard already from Kelsey, because we actually cover each of these ladies' stories in more depth in the Nutrition Network Carnivore training, which is being released, which is launching at the end of this month, so that people can find out exactly how to treat eating disorders using a carnivore diet. And we speak, as a bonus feature, we speak to each of you and dive more into this. But so I've spoken to Kelsey already, and I know everything you're saying, Crystal, is what I've heard Kelsey say. This, and even Amanda, the stories start in childhood. The first thing you can remember, you're struggling. And I think that's really, really important, because I heard that through all three of your interviews. You struggled from the beginning, and it is, I think we need to remember that eating disorders are mental health conditions, but they come with physical health conditions. And each of you can talk more to that. And I think, Crystal, thank you for showing us exactly how severe it is, and the impact that it has on your everyday life, your career, your relationships. And we're going to dive into that in a bit more detail here today as well. So thank you so much for that summary, Crystal. I can see that you're just chalk and cheese now compared to where you were. Amanda, can you tell us a little summary of your story? So we're taking a little, overview of all three of your stories, maybe 2 minutes, and then we're going to dive into different aspects as we go.
Sure. Mine started personally. I suffered morbid obesity as a child, so very early in young age introduced to the world of dieting and counting calories and exercising more, and that led me into a career as a dietitian. So for many years I trained and practiced as a conventional dietitian using the very models that I had used on myself, only to find they weren't working for me in the long term and also weren't helping my patients. I moved into the area of ketogenic nutrition and training in that after being inspired by my father's cancer journey and my stepfather's journey. And the more I delved into the science and research, I thought, I think this is going to help me. I think about food all the time. I'm starving all the time. I had issues with stress management, anxiety, acne, gut problems, binge restrict cycles, secretly food, gorging food, addiction tendencies. And as I transitioned into keto, a lot of these things, started to dissipate. In more recent years, I moved into an animal-based ketogenic carnivore diet, and that again, pivotal changes in particularly I would say my mental health, my mood stability, my concentration and memory, and my food noise in my head. I would say that I was still keto-defying a lot of things in the beginning of my keto journey and desertifying everything, and still struggled with thinking about food a lot and what else can I concoct in my kitchen to make it keto version, and carnivore kind of took all that away. It took away a lot of the choice, but also the noise in my head, and I no longer spent all this time thinking about food. It was like I was living. It honestly felt like I was living for the first time, and I was able to put so much more time and energy into so many other aspects of my life, and that is what I love about this. Is I felt like I finally were balanced in body and brain, and the capacity was there for me to go and channel more energy into other modalities and connect with people and my own body at a deeper level.
Wow, thank you, Amanda. And I think you have such a unique story to offer, because not only did you struggle with eating disorders yourself and addictive tendencies when it comes to ultra processed foods and sugars, but you went on to become a dietitian, and then go through all the conventional wisdom only to find something that worked and then implement this in your practice. So you have a lot of anecdotes to tell us about what you're seeing within your practice, that it's beyond just the three of you ladies. It's not like we've handpicked 3 anomalies and asked you 3 anomalies to come and talk to us about how an animal-based diet has helped you. But in fact, I think Amanda's experience within her clinical practice can show that this is a recurring outcome when you apply animal-based diets to eating disorders. And I think it's really inspirational. So we're definitely going to dive into that in a bit more detail with you, Amanda, as we go. But right now, I would like to take everyone back. You 3 are going to have to take all of us back to your worst place. I want you to think about yourselves at your worst when it came to your eating disorder, and tell us what you think none of the audience knows about eating disorders. What do you think? Because people who haven't had it, or those people out there who are listening who do have eating disorders, who feel misunderstood, I want you to tell us what you think what you want people to know about eating disorders and how it feels to be there at rock bottom. Let's go in the order that we went before, starting with Kelsey, then Crystal, then Amanda.
That's a heavy question, Tamsin. Yeah, I think, especially with anorexia, what's always thrown around is that it's all about control. And for some reason, that's never resonated with me at all. What has resonated with me is that my experience of anorexia was just like crippling anxiety, like living in torment, really. And I mean, at my worst, I was like going to bed wishing I would never wake up, because when I was awake, it was like me stuck in this like deep part of my brain, unable to just like cope. I was like crying hysterically every day, day in and day out, but no tears would come up. I think I was just so depleted. I literally had nothing within me. I used to have really, really long curly hair that used to go all the way down to my bottom, and it would just come out in clumps. And I think, you did speak about this, but financially and also on a family system level, like to see how it affected my family. I don't think I've ever seen my dad cry.
Okay, I think we seem to have lost Kelsey, or she's frozen. But we will come back to her again, because I think she's, what she went through really took her to the point of death, and affected her family to a level, and her career. And, so I think we need to hear more about that, and we will come back to you, Kelsey. And can I ask all of our guests, when you aren't talking, if you can just mute yourself, because I'm hearing a slight echo and I think it might help with the sound quality. But Crystal, you don't mute yourself now because you're on. Can you tell us how you felt when you were at rock bottom, that you wish people understood about your experience of eating disorders?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, that's such a loaded question. Basically, I feel like with binge eating disorder, it's not, I don't know, I just didn't feel like it was as well recognized, and people would often sort of deny my experience, and it would have such a heavy impact on my like mental health and well-being, and I just wasn't really believed. And it took me so long to find help, and I would be put on medications and things like that, but never really be taken seriously. And the mental health aspect with it, you just suffer such severe depression. You know, there would be days where I wouldn't leave my bed, but I would just feel so powerless towards food, and I would wake up and the food noise would be so severe that it would be the first thing that I would hear, and I would go out and, you know, get whatever food, and then afterwards feel like such shame and such guilt. And sometimes I would eat to the point where I would feel so sick that I'd either like make a hot water bottle, or I would like bring myself to like vomit, not even because of the guilt, but just because I felt so unwell. And it also impacted my finances. You know, I would get paid on a Thursday, and then I would spend all my money on food over the weekend. And then it would create this, I guess, subconsciously binge and restrict cycle, because then I wouldn't have money for food, but it almost felt like, well, that's what I deserved. So I didn't deserve to eat like throughout the week. And it was just this constant roller coaster. I think as well, just like the psychological effects, you know, I think we just have such like low self-confidence and low self-esteem. And from age like 16 to 24, I was in an abusive relationship, and that really impacted me, because I think with the eating disorder, I felt like I deserved it in some way. And I think that that's not really spoken about that often, like all of the external things that you endure because of the low self-esteem and low self-worth. And then, yeah, also the panic attacks, and it was just such a hard time. And I can't, sort of looking back now, it just seems like another lifetime ago. So yeah, it's crazy to see how far you've come.
Thank you, Crystal. I think, you know, what I'm hearing again and again is that I think people forget this is a mental health disorder. And as Kelsey said, it is the leading cause of death when it comes to mental health disorders. So out of all the mental health disorders that kill, this one kills the most. And I think I just read a stat that said 1 in 52 Americans. Okay, I mustn't get that stat, but they anyway. I've clearly forgotten the stat, so let's forget I said that. But my point is, a lot of people are dying, but not only that, the suffering that you guys have explained. I think people must just take a moment and think about how that must feel. Like, I want everyone who's watching and listening to this to think about how that feels, to be that tormented. If you can think about, if you don't struggle with mental health conditions and you're lucky enough not to, then think about the everyone gets sad, right? Think about the saddest you've ever been, or the most stressed out and anxious you've ever been. And imagine living in that space all the time, or spending much of your time in that space. Imagine being tormented by thoughts that consume your mind even when you don't want them to. And it's not that you're not clever. You can say, I shouldn't be feeling this way. Or you can say to yourself, you cognitively tell yourself this shouldn't be, but it remains so. And I think the impact that Crystal and Kelsey, I want to go back to you, Kelsey, now, because we didn't finish with you, but Crystal was talking about the impact on her relationships, you know, how she ended up in a decade-long abusive relationship as well because of it. You know, it impacted on her work. It impacted on her, you know, that's beyond the torment that you're living in on a day-to-day basis and the physical damage you're doing to yourself. So we'll come back to the relationship with you, Kelsey, but I had one more summary point that I wanted to draw out from you, Crystal. I know you mentioned this in the interview we did within the actual carnivore training. And you mentioned, you know, this purging or this binging till you actually are in physical pain and you feel so sick. and putting yourself in relationships, abusive relationships, for example, or other behaviors that you feel you deserved. You deserved to starve for the other half of the week because you didn't have food, because you had been so disgusting and eaten so much. You were punishing yourself because of what you felt. You were judging yourself with words like, I ate too much, or whatever words you told yourself you were. You were then believed you deserved to feel the pain, the discomfort, the hunger, the abuse. And you mentioned in your other interview the word self-harm. And I just wanted to reiterate that. Crystal said, no one thinks of this as a form of self-harm. They think of cutting or they think of burning. And I wanted to mention that here as well, that this is a form of self-harm. And one of the diagnostic criteria for addiction is continuing to do that in the face of evident harm to yourself. So Crystal, I wanted to bring that out based on what you'd said, because I think it's important. Kelsey, I want to go back to you before we lost you, and you were talking about how this impacted on your relationships. And I don't know if you also wanted to mention impact on maybe your career, your studies, or anything else you wanted to mention there before you got cut off.
Yeah, we love some Wi-Fi connection issues. I kind of was just wanting to say that it doesn't only affect the individual suffering, but it really affects everyone else. But yeah, I mean, I started studying so many things and I wasn't ever able to finish them because I would just find myself in another treatment center. So, I mean, I'm very grateful for it, but there was a long period of time where I was kind of frustrated in that I felt like I lost most of my life. And, whereas a lot of my friends are now like settling down and getting married and having children, I almost feel like I'm only now beginning. But I say that with, deep empathy, because it was very real and it is a very real comparison and, sensitivity to have, just given societal, norms and pressures. But I'm also very grateful for the journey that I've gone on as well. But I just wanted to say that another like low point also is that I remember at a time when I wasn't able to drive, so I would have to I wasn't ever able to be alone at this point. I was just too much in a bad place to be alone, and I would have to go with my mom to fetch my younger brother at school. And I remember there was one of the other moms, she had obviously recently had a child because she was holding her baby. And I remember just looking at this baby and I remember thinking to myself, oh my gosh, this infant can do something that I, at 20 something years old, could not do. And that was, it's hungry and it's going to allow itself to eat. Like I had kind of gone so deep in my brain where I was able to override one of the most natural inbuilt mechanisms of being a human. And that is not to question when you're hungry and just to go and eat something without thinking about it. I mean, I wish that is something that I just wish I could go back to, because I remember not necessarily being so severe inside of me. And that was such a deep internalization. And as you said, one of the biggest frustrations that I've had is that it's not that I haven't been aware. I've never once been in denial that I had an eating disorder and I had all of these issues and struggles. My rational mind can rationalize it all. And I knew that I didn't have to feel the way I was. But I think that was probably just one of the most frustrating parts, is that I'm aware, and I'm sure Crystal and Amanda can also attest to this. It's not like you're oblivious to what's happening. And in fact, most of the anxiety is probably coming from the fact that there is this discordance with what you actually genuinely want and what you're allowing yourself to be able to do. And yeah, I really resonate with it being a form of self-harm as well. 100%.
Thank you, Kelsey. I think everything you've said is really, really important. And I think what I want to highlight there is the whole natural kind of you overriding your natural birthright, your natural just human drives to get to that point where you're so unnatural. What you're doing is so unnatural. You've got to start questioning why. Is there something in the environment that's unnaturally affecting your biology in a way that it can no longer function like it's supposed to? Because what we're hearing here underlying all of these, it's a mental health condition. And if we look into the recent area of metabolic psychiatry, we know that there are major metabolic underpinnings to mental health conditions. So there's that. And then again, with the relationship thing, affecting the people around you is such a big deal. And I do think we need to acknowledge that this is not just the individual suffering. It is not. It is all their loved ones around them suffering too. And then that's not where the impact stops. The impact goes on to the workplace, to the place of study, to the ability of very, very capable and clever people not being able to join the workforce when they should or could. I can attest to every single one of these three ladies being very, very clever, very capable. You know, and they've been affected. Their ability to join the workforce in the case of Kelsey, or study, or in the case of Crystal, get out of bed and go to work, you know, it has been affected. So you're seeing the community start to be affected. And that's not even to mention the money, the financial implications, the burden on the healthcare facilities. You know, we're not even talking about that. I mean, Kelsey had multiple inpatient admissions where she's at one stage spent 7 months in a government care facility. If that could have been avoided by her getting better sooner, that could have freed up a bed. You know what I mean? So I think if we can look at the crux of what's going on here and try and fix it, which clearly is possible, then we cannot impact just impact the torment of each of these individuals who's struggling, but the torment of their loved ones and the impact on the greater society and economy at large. This is a big deal that we're talking about here today. So I want to move on now to Amanda. Amanda, can you tell us the impact? I know that maybe your experience is different from Kelsey's and Crystal's, but can you tell us the impact that your experience with sugar addictive tendencies and an undiagnosed eating disorder, and then also maybe you can incorporate what kind of impacts you're seeing within your clients, within your patients, so that you can try and paint us a picture of your and their experiences when they are at their rock bottom, please.
No worries. I would say when at rock bottom, I just felt totally stuck in this world of food obsession, counting calories, dieting, physically and mentally exhausted. So just waking up, and that was at the forefront of my thinking from the moment I opened my eyes to the moment I went to bed, and just wondering how I would keep going through life, getting older, and putting as much time and effort, especially as I was becoming a mother and looking after others, and just feeling like at war with my own body, and additionally working in a field where I thought I was doing a lot of the right things. I just couldn't get it. I literally blamed myself that I did not have enough willpower to do what I was meant to do, and it was just me and my fault. And it took me to start to really look outside the conventional ways, and that was luckily through the guidance, you know, and just other people influencing me, because I was very, very much dedicated to what I was doing, and I just got that desperate, especially because it was I suffered significant anxiety. I was a worry, what, and if you add 2 children into the mix and having to worry about others, I just didn't know how I was going to cope, because I had so much chaos going on inside, and just from the outside made everything look rosy. A lot of mine was in secrecy. There was no way I wanted to divulge what I was experiencing, because I was working in it professionally, and I didn't want people to know how much I was suffering. I would say when I noticed the change, like literally eating the opposite to what I'd be trained, I went through major concern that I was causing myself harm. I literally still remember my first meal and thinking, I'm going to have a heart attack. Like, I just really did not truly know what I know now about nutrition science and the corruption and the flaws in a lot of the population-based messages. And I just thought, well, you know what, if I'm going to do this, I'm going to track every biomarker I can, and I'm going to see what happens to my own body. And if this actually does what I'm reading it can do, I will dedicate my life to helping others. And that is literally my story, is that everything that I teach people or I'm intrigued about or curious, I will go down that rabbit hole and I'll make sure I find out about it so I can spread the news. And if I don't know, I love being connected to experts in this field. But if we're talking about what I do in my everyday practice, is that has morphed over the years from being, metabolically based to a lot of mental health, because they're majorly connected. And that's the thing that I didn't really know. I didn't know until metabolic psychiatry became a thing. I don't think people knew there was this big interconnection between mental health, metabolic health, and diet quality. And that is been some big pieces of the puzzle in my own journey, but also professionally. I think that's where people don't realize there's this major connection here, and it has a lot to do with our food environment and what we are feeding ourselves. It does not match our biology, so people are getting sicker and sicker. And if we just start to teach people the basic biological needs from a nutrition perspective, it can set a really good foundation so they can establish biological balance and do this deeper work that Kelsey and Crystal and I have been doing, is that it allows us to do that. Because we feel more stable in brain and body, and we're not living a blood sugar roller coaster. And the food obsession and that chatter, it's hard to explain, but the chatter that you have inside your head, if you had food or sugar addiction, drowns out a lot of things. And it's very, very, it impacts your mood, your personality, relationships, because in the back of your mind, you've got just constant chatter about what you're going to eat next, how you're going to manipulate it to be calorie controlled or whatever approach. And that impacts everything you do. And for me professionally, for a long time, I just lost hope. I didn't think I was going to stay training or practicing as a dietitian, because I was not seeing much health transformation. And when you work in a hospital, you see a lot of illness, and the food environment in there is appalling. So I went through these years of, I don't think I want to do this. This is a really unfortunate profession. I think I know how to eat, and I'm struggling myself. But that all changed when I came into the world of ketogenic nutrition. And whilst I was extremely skeptical and initially viewed it as a fad and something that's quite dangerous, once you actually learn the science and then try it, you live it, and you realize there's this metabolic shift that it.
Okay, so I'm going to pause you there, Amanda, just because I feel like the conversation is moving on to an area that I don't want to delve into just yet.
Yes.
Because I want to get to it. It's really, really important that we get to what actually works. But before we do, I feel like we've missed out something, and that is the conventional treatment. Okay, what are people using to treat this? What are traditional, conventional medical doctors, psychologists, dietitians, healthcare facilities doing to treat eating disorders? And in that regard, Amanda, I want you to just tell us, in your capacity as a dietitian, specifically, and I'm going to ask Kelsey about other things, not diet necessarily, but for you, Amanda, I want you to tell us about the conventional treatment when it comes to diet. So tell us what is accepted as the conventional treatment, a dietary treatment for treating eating disorders, and tell us a bit about restrictive eating and all those kind of things. I know you've go into the Minnesota experiments as well. So can you tell us a little bit about that? How, if you have an eating disorder and you go into a treatment facility and you see a conventional dietitian, what is her thinking or his thinking, and what are you supposed to eat according to conventional treatment wisdom, if you will?
So the nutrition counselling side of things, so cognitive behaviour therapy is classed as gold standard, but when we're talking nutrition counselling, it's very, very much still coming from a psychological and behavioural perspective. So a lot of the counselling is driven by a couple of models of practice. So there's the restraint theory, which basically suggests that if you restrict food, so it's known as cognitive restraint, you paradoxically lead to overeating and food obsession and binge eating episodes. And so basically this imposes these strict food rules where you're restricting someone's eating leads to disinhibition, and they feel out of control and start over consuming. And this is supported by Ansel Keys' Minnesota studies, where they're studying the biology of human starvation basically, and they're semi-starved, and they develop these significant mood disturbances, binge eating tendencies, metabolic slowdown, because they're undernourished. And so that theory is driving a lot of eating disorder management, is do not replace a restriction on someone's eating patterns. It's there. And then there's this other model, all foods fit. That means that they're going to be encouraging a variety of foods, all foods, whether they're highly processed or not, because again, this diet, we don't want to cause disordered eating through this restraint theory, and we need to look at food as kind of a grey colour, not black and white, and everything should be included, but in moderation. And so that's driving a lot of the nutritional counselling. It's very anorexic centric, okay? So it doesn't always help the people who are struggling with morbid obesity or other metabolic morbidity. It's just no strict dieting. Let's try to normalize eating by allowing them to eat everything, but we'll portion control it. Okay, so calorie-based kind of, either to get them to restore body weight, let's put a lot of calories on them and sometimes fast, and eating anything, and I'm talking highly processed food right within the mix, to let's help them manage their weight, but we'll just, from a calorie model, eat less, move more kind of thing. And yes, you're still allowed the highly processed foods within there most of the time, unless, of course, there's something else diagnosed, such as food intolerances, all those things. So the conventional message to place a restriction is very, very, very much at the forefront of all the counselling.
Thank you, Amanda. That's exactly what I wanted to hear. And we are going to move on to where a carnivore diet, which is very restrictive, you're going to tell us in a bit about where this fits into that messaging, but not yet. First, I want to move on to Kelsey, who can tell us how this looks in practice. Kelsey, could you paint us a picture of your first meal upon admission to a private healthcare mental health eating disorder clinic? Specifically, it was an eating disorder clinic. Can you tell us what that first meal looked like, what this looks like in practice, or at least looked like for you in practice?
Yeah, oh my gosh. I was just nodding profusely because everything Amanda was saying, I was like, yep, this is what I experienced. I remember arriving at, as you said, Tamsin, an eating disorder specific clinic, and I was very vulnerable. I wasn't able to say goodbye to my mom. They just took me in and got me seated on this long table with all the other patients in the clinic, and all of a sudden they bring me this massive plate of food. It was like a chicken burger the size of my head with French fries, and yeah, I've kind of blocked it out of my memory clearly. And I was just put this huge plate of food was put right in front of me, and there was an RA, which is a registered a recovery assistant, and she was very strict, and she said, "You're going to eat this meal, and none of us are leaving the table until you're finished." And I'm smiling now, but I went into one of the biggest panic attacks of my life. I was hyperventilating. I was, from that moment, just traumatized, actually, unfortunately. So, but yeah, practically it just looks like massive portions of food, of all food, processed, not anything and everything, because they kind of do base your level of recovery on your ability to moderate. all foods. And it was a nightmare. I had to eat 6 times a day. Right before bed, in one of my facilities, I was given once this, like, I'm sure most people have bars of Lindt chocolate in their respective countries. I had to eat an entire one of those with like 3 handfuls of almond nuts and a massive glass of soya milk for some reason. And that was like me every night before bed. And that was like my 6th meal. And yeah, and there was more than that. There was also like just a lot of like, I mean, you're totally supervised. You're not allowed to be alone. You can't go to the bathroom alone, obviously, understandably as well. I mean, I am ambivalent about this as well, because I do understand where this is coming from as well. So I do just want to say that, you know, eating disorders are very complicated and they do have to be micromanaged in that regard, because, you know, it's all very well saying that we're healing and we're well, but like also behind closed doors, that's also when you have to live with yourself and the torment of your mind. And so in that regard, you know, 24-hour supervision is actually sometimes necessary. So I am, I just want to acknowledge that as well, because it's not all like they're evil. But yeah, for most people, it's just traumatic, actually.
So you were given a traumatically ginormous meal when you were at your absolute skinniest, and it sounds like from the stories that everyone can listen to in more detail, when we're looking at the standard of care within an inpatient facility, they obviously got your weight up, but you always relapsed. Can you tell us a bit more about the environment, very, very briefly, because I want to move on to Crystal when it comes to, you know, psychology sessions and how that helped her or didn't help her until maybe she was metabolically fixed. But for you, Kelsey, just can you paint us a very brief picture? You've been in multiple eating disorder and mental health inpatient facilities. What is the standard of care offering there, and how do you experience it? Is it a healthy environment? Is it a beneficial environment? Do you come out fixed? Tell us about it briefly.
Yeah, no, as you said, I relapsed every time. Just very briefly, it kind of feels like an all-girls high school on steroids, like a dormitory room. And that's also one of the criticisms I do have of the standard of care, especially within anorexia, is that they kind of put all the anorexics together. And in that regard, it's like a whole bunch of addicts, and they kind of like feed off each other, which I found very, very triggering. And, you know, the environment of calling people out on eating disorder behaviors was also very encouraged. And for a very sensitive soul like me, I was just constantly walking around on like with even more fear. We also had to wake up every morning in one specific institution reciting that we are sick, we are diseased, we have an illness. Basically, like kind of like, I mean, from that, what that left me with is that I'm a criminal and I am a very bad person. And yeah, I should not be trusted. I should be feared. Like but the environment was very, very triggering. Tamsin, earlier you mentioned that I was in a government hospital psychiatric ward for 7 months, and that was actually the first little glimpse that I had of some sort of solace, because I was the only eating disordered patient there, and a lot was normalized for me. So for me, it was quite effective not to be around other anorexics, because of course the environment of like a symptom of anorexia, and I'm sure not only just anorexia, but like maybe femininity or just being a human, is to compare yourself with other people. So that is probably why for me it was ineffective. But I have also heard of other stories where, you know, being with others kind of brought about a sense of solidarity. So I suppose it does depend on the bio-individuality.
Thank you, Kelsey. So thus far, I'm seeing the standard of care when it comes to nutrition is restrictive. Restrictive diets are out. Moderation in all things, including ultra-processed food and chocolates and hamburgers and chips and everything else, is encouraged. Eating multiple times a day, eating a lot to get your weight back up, despite the fact that it ends up in relapse. Generally, that is the standard of care when it comes to that. And when it comes to inpatient clinics, it really sounds like, for anyone who's read One Flew Over Cuckoo's Nest, you know, or Victoria Dies is another book that brings to mind. I don't know, it's just an unhealthy, traumatic experience. An inpatient girls' dormitory kind of experience. It doesn't seem, I know there are going to be some like maybe the government facility was better and it offered you a level of solace, but it still didn't cure you. And so we're seeing different interventions with different levels of success, but all of which don't provide a resolution to the conditions. And Crystal, briefly, I know we're running out of time and I really want to move on to the carnivore diet itself. So this is the last question when it comes to the actual eating disorder side of things. But I want you to paint us a picture of the other two pillars of conventional treatment, being cognitive behavioral therapy or psychological interventions, as well as medications. Can you tell us how that looked in your case and how your experience was of that and its efficacy, please?
Yeah, for sure. I feel like when I first sought treatment, it was just kind of like, okay, we're going to Band-Aid method, I guess, like put me on medication. And I was prescribed Zoloft, the first one, which I believe actually causes weight gain and makes you more hungry. So there wasn't any consideration of the binge eating disorder, not to mention the psychological effects that would have on me with the weight gain, because I feel like sometimes, when you do gain weight, you think, okay, well, I'm just going to gain even more weight because I'm already disgusting. So I may as well just keep going. And then I switched that and I met a really great clinical psychologist, and I was moved on to Cymbalta. And then basically when you're on an eating disorder plan, you have to see a psychiatrist just for like one session, just to make sure everything's going smoothly and they can continue with the treatment. And this psychiatrist, I spoke to him for all of maybe 10, maybe 20 minutes tops. And he was like, you know what, we're going to change your medication and you're going to now be on Brenelex. And that literally, it was the worst experience. I had a massive dissociative episode. I had the worst side effects I've ever gone through, and I've gone through a lot, but that experience was the worst of my whole entire life. I had a massive dissociative episode where I didn't really feel real. My memory, I couldn't remember things. Even my vocabulary, I would forget words. I felt really slow. I had kind of like static vision. I couldn't see correctly. And I literally just ended up in my room binge eating and watching Vanderpump Rules because that's all I felt like I could do. And I was so scared of the outside world. And with that type of medication as well, you can't just suddenly stop it. And I got told, okay, well, you can just adjust the medication. You need to get used to it, maybe up it. And so I kept upping it. And at the time I had so much trust in the medical field, and I thought that their opinion was obviously, they're professionals, so I trust them over what was going on in my own body and internally. And I just kept getting sicker and having these horrible side effects. And I got like a bit paranoid even, and it was so terrible. And then I was able to slowly come off it. And then I introduced carnivore because I thought I never want to experience that again. I never want to rely on someone else's opinion and someone else's medication to try and get better, because it scared me so much. And so that was very, very hard time in my life, but I got through it.
Thank you, Crystal. So I mean, what I'm hearing here is very similar to what I've heard from Kelsey in the past as well. The medications, I mean, some people, they will help, and that's great, but there is a huge population that is treatment resistant, and all they get from it is side effects, such as weight gain, which is terribly triggering within this population group, especially for anyone really. But I mean, how much more within this population group? The weight gain, and then dissociation, not feeling yourself, not having, your brain isn't your own. Like, there's so many side effects: constipation, insomnia, loss of libido, a loss of affective, your feelings. You've become like a more zombie-like, perhaps. There's lots of effects that can come from loss of motivation, which is ironically brought on by many of these things. But when you're actually already not motivated, so loss of suicidal ideation comes from many of these psych meds as well. Which again is contrary to, why would you put someone on something that's going to increase suicidal ideation when they already probably suicidal, ideation happening. Anyway, that was a terrible sentence, but you get my drift. So We haven't got that much time left. We've only got 10 minutes. And unfortunately, this is the most important part, which is why you're going to have to join the carnivore training, because we're going to cover in the carnivore training, you will learn all about how to formulate a nutritionally sufficient carnivore diet, how to implement it, considerations, and if you sign up now, because the launch is at the end of the month, you're going to get 20% off this training. We cover various, not just eating disorders. I mean, we're talking about eating disorders now, but there are various other things. We cover mental health. We cover metabolic health, insulin resistance, diabetes, athletes, cancer. So many different therapeutic applications of a carnivore diet, autoimmune conditions, but then practical applications as well. We also cover the ethics and sustainability. And what about a carnivore diet in pregnant women, lactations, other like ethical considerations. So if you want to dive into this in more detail than we have time for today, please sign up for the training. It is for healthcare practitioners, coaches, and lay people, anyone who wants to learn more about this space. But moving on to what we do have time for a little bit in the carnivore diet, Amanda, very briefly, please, can you tell us about the biological changes that happen within the human body when we adopt an animal-based diet, and how this can affect, make you better, basically. So what biologically is happening and how can it make you better? Because I'm seeing each one of you refer to the fact that once I was metabolically healthy, I was able to do the psychological work, right? I was able to do what I needed to do from that point. So what makes us metabolically healthy when we eat an animal-based diet? Very briefly, please, Amanda.
The first thing I'd like to mention is the shift into the body using an alternate fuel source, so ketones. Often, nutritional ketosis comes with multiple benefits, and the brain particularly likes to, well, I've heard up to 2/3 of the brain can fuel on ketones, and that is one of the big parts of why I think ketogenic and carnivore addresses underlying biological disruption. When we look from a nutritional kind of density perspective, animal foods are the most bioavailable form of nutrition. So if someone is suffering from gut disturbances and issues with absorption from not eating enough foods that make the neurotransmitters in their brain, or not eating enough fats that make up, 60% of the brain, we're going to have problems. So we're kind of tackling a lot of those things. When you put them on a high-fat animal-based diet, they're going to get an abundance of the essential amino acids, an abundance of the essential fatty acids, and then micronutrients, which help all those metabolic processes. They're the cofactors. Whilst not many people think about them because we're calorie-minded, they help with the metabolic, conversions, and they're highly available in animal rich diets. So if you're looking from that biological kind of underpinning, we've got this beautiful metabolic shift and food in its most nourishing form. And that, I think, is what's helping address the metabolic aspect, as well as the neurobiological aspect, as well as the gut-brain connection and microbiome aspect. And I think people fear the removal of carbohydrates and the removal of fiber when really they're not essential. And we're now learning that even the microbiome, is metabolically flexible too, and can shift and utilize, they believe, ketones and other fuel sources. So I'm hoping I rounded that off quickly for you, but let me know if you want me to do it.
That was beautiful. That was just so good. And if anyone wants to hear more, you just got to join the training. Amanda does an amazing lecture on the topic of eating disorders and carnivore as a treatment for eating disorders. And she also has a publication in the works on that topic. So please sign up if you want to watch her lecture on that, diving into the nitty-gritty of what's actually happening and what the literature says in more detail. Amanda, but the diet's restrictive, and you shouldn't be doing restrictive diets when you are dealing with a population who eats restrictively, should you?
if you quickly glance at it, it's absolutely restrictive, but we need to look at what are we restricting. We're restricting foods that are biologically not needed and actually can be very harmful. So you've got to help people reframe that restriction to it's actually re-nourishment. We're giving you what you're biologically evolved to eat. It's just in this modern food environment, it absolutely looks restrictive. But most of the food in the modern food environment is not food, it's food-like product. And this is what we need people to see, is that a lot of the food that we're used to seeing on everyone's plate and what everyone's eating is actually not food. It's genetically engineered or modified, and it's going to play havoc with your health. So my message here is just look at what are we restricting. We're not restricting the essential nutrients we need to thrive as humans.
Thank you, Amanda. And what I would like to just compare this to a toddler who, is playing with matches. You restrict them by taking the matches away, but if you provide them with a developmentally appropriate toy instead, is that restrictive? Or are you giving them something that they need that's actually going to help them to grow and develop better, and not burn themselves in the house down? So I think that that's really what we're talking about here.
Now, just calories to nutrients. Yeah.
Yes, exactly. There's such a big difference between restricting calories, which we need. We need a certain amount of energy to live as humans, to restricting nutrients or not even nutrients, foods that we don't need and that are actually deleterious to our health, exactly, rather than prioritizing the nutrients that we do need, which are good for our health. So before we close, I would like Crystal to start by telling us, what do you eat? What does this carnivore diet look like to you? Can you take us through like a day of what you eat?
Okay, well, I'm pretty basic because I feel like the simpler the better for me, because I don't have to think about it and it just makes my life so much easier. So I normally have eggs, and then for lunch I might have some lamb chops, and then for dinner I will have steak. On the weekend, if I have events and things like that, or go out, I usually have seafood to change it up a little bit. So yeah, that's kind of what I eat in the day.
And what do you drink, Crystal?
I just drink water. I don't have any coffee or tea. I was never really a coffee or tea drinker to begin with. I was highly addicted to Pepsi Max and Coke Zero. So I think for me, cutting the caffeine out works. And also, since cutting it, my sleep is like on point. I fall asleep exactly at the same time each night and wake up. So that works for me. I do have these, it's called Sodalies, and I use them instead of alcohol. So they're just kind of like a light soft drink, and I can have them on occasion if I feel like it, but they don't trigger me or anything. So yeah.
Thank you, Crystal. And do you consider yourself better or in remission?
Yeah, 100%.
Sorry.
Yeah. Pardon, sorry?
No, I just said since you started eating this way.
Oh, for sure. I feel like I had so many vices. I was drinking, vaping, just everything, just so chaotic. And since introducing carnivore, I was able to remove them and not use them for like escapism and a coping mechanism. And I can actually just regulate my emotions and my mood stabilize. So I just feel so much more secure, and I can just go about my day, and it's just such a pleasant place to live now. I've got my brain back.
Thank you, Crystal. That's very powerful. Kelsey, can you tell us what your average day of eating looks like?
Sure. I also just want to say that like the carnivore diet for me is the most like liberating thing ever. Like I actually have not once felt restricted. I felt so liberated, and what was restrictive was my old life. Like that's all I can really say. Like what was restrictive was not being able to study, was not being able to even talk or just live. So I just wanted to say that, just a proper what Amanda was saying. But I also I kind of say that I just eat the rainbow of meats. So I love any and all animal food. Fatty meat is like my favorite. So I really can't, I usually eat about like a kilogram, if not more a day. I kind of just listen to my hunger cues, and I have drunk coffee. I'm more of a coffee than a tea drinker, but I have included those in my diet, and I love sparkling water. But I think also the element of like a lack of just no more having like decision fatigue was also just so liberating. Like I just, protein, fats, that's just me. Yeah.
Thank you, Kelsey. And have you had any relapses since you started a carnivore diet? Was it 7 years ago? I think you started it.
I started it 7 years ago. Actually, very recently, I had a few gut complications, and I inadvertently did lose quite a lot of weight, and that was very worrying for me because, of course, I mean, just with my history, it was like, what is happening here? Because I wasn't actively trying to be anorexic or trying to lose weight. So I would say that's kind of like not even a relapse actually, but it was more like an indirect relapse, because what I found, which was very interesting, is that it kind of, me being at that lower weight, triggered the same type of neurochemistry, triggered the same sort of thought processes that I had once remembered. And that was really shocking. I mean, it kind of does make sense. But yeah, that was kind of like a little, but I mean, really, when I left my last treatment center in 2018, which was a few months before I found carnivore, I was like, this is my last. And yeah, I don't think I'm ever going to go back to one.
My mute button wasn't working. Thank you, Kelsey. I think that's really, really powerful that you say, rather than feeling restricted, you feel liberated, and you haven't had a relapse of anorexia since your last facility 7 years ago. So thank you. Clearly this is working for you. Clearly it's working for Crystal. Amanda, can you conclude the session by telling us what your daily eating and drinking looks like?
Sure. I would say I love Kelsey's terminology, the rainbow of the animal kingdom. I predominantly eat ruminant meats. I love beef and lamb, and I get variety from purchasing them from different farms and butchers. And let me tell you, there's definitely changes in taste when you try different butchers and things like that. I love tallow. So tallow is a big part of my diet. I have a bit of an intolerance to dairy, so my carnivore approach has been inclusive of dairy and removing dairy, and I do find I'm much better with less dairy in there. So I do include butter, but I not as heavy-handed as I used to be. I love seafood and oily fish, so that definitely comes in to my weekly rotation. I still eat chicken and pork, although I prefer how my body feels with less of those. I sometimes introduce some very select foods if I have travel plans, or, it's a time of year where there might be a little bit more socializing, only to make things easier, because there has been times where I've tripped up and had some, I would say, some unpleasant symptoms from introducing something that I hadn't eaten for a long time. So I'm very, very select, but sometimes I may bring in some plant-based foods. I do, like Kelsey, drink coffee, but I limit it. And I predominantly drink water and sparkly water, and sometimes use electrolytes if it's around training, but otherwise it's a lot of salt, trace mineral rich or sea salt is in there as well. But it sounds so basic, but I'm much like Kelsey. It's to just not be obsessing about recipes all day and thinking about food and what I'm going to concoct. I just love that. I feel totally liberated. I can put so much time and energy into other things, and my mouth waters. I look forward to seeing a steak on my plate, to be honest, even if there's no other color. That was probably a big adjustment, is just looking at your plate from like the color of the rainbow sometimes that's a bit of an adjustment, but it's funny how your brain and body adapt to, I find my mouth waters when I look at these foods now, and I love opening my fridge and just seeing all this beautiful, nourishing. And that's how I talk, in all the years of doing the dieting, from, counting points at Weight Watchers, I just love that I can look at food and speak to it like it's nourishing me, not in these numbers or, you know, how much can I restrict today or limit myself to. It's just my carnivore approach has become more intuitive, even though I've had times where it's been very, very structured to help my own healing, and I've really, really monitored things to make sure I'm doing it as well formulated as possible. This many years in, you really can, like Kelsey said, you can kind of trust what your body's telling you, where years ago I just wouldn't. I wouldn't have said I could trust the instincts I was getting because it was so dysregulated. And that's what I love. I love teaching my clients as much as I can, but also letting them know I'd love to move you back to intuitive eating. But once you've got that balance and you can really see when you're putting something in, what it's doing to you and how it's making you feel.
Thank you, Amanda. And do you feel you've relapsed to where you used to be before carnivore, or have you maintained?
No, I would say with I actually had to have major surgery last year and put on some. I'm a former severe food addict, so whilst we haven't spoke about that, food addiction isn't, recognised as a diagnosable condition. However, it has a lot of cross or overlap with binge eating disorder that is clinically recognised, but it's kind of compulsive food tendencies and obsessive thinking around food. And I was placed on opioids last year, very, very strong pain relief. And let me tell you, I had a big surge of food obsessive thoughts, and I say what I use in my language is my sugar dragon really woke up and was with vengeance. And what I lapsed on was things in the dairy component. So I'd cut them out, and I struggled during that time. So
again, I think it shows that there are going to be these blips, whether it's a gastrointestinal condition like Kelsey described, or whether it's that you have to get major surgery and you need to go on opioids. There are going to be challenges in the road, but it sounds like each of you this has been the most successful intervention that you've had thus far. So thank you, ladies, so much for being so vulnerable with us and with the audience, and telling us, your stories, which are so valuable. And so many people out there are experiencing it and hiding it just the way you hid it, but there is hope for them. And as clinicians out there, we can really make a difference in people's lives by considering alternative dietary strategies, metabolic therapies, as an adjunct to standard of care. And really it can result in more successful standard of care. So please join the carnivore training to find out more, find out how to implement this in your practice, and take greater control of your health and the health of those people who put their lives into your hands. Thank you, ladies, so much. Join the training now before the end of the month if you want that 20% off. Over and out.